From humble beginnings to the pinnacle of success, one man's journey proves that with determination, anything is possible. This is Catch as Catch Can with George Tinsley Sr., inspiring conversations of triumph over adversity. Here's George.
Hello. Today we have with us Mr. Tony Gaskins Jr., a fine young man that I've heard a whole lot about, and I want to read to you his introduction here, but I think that everyone will enjoy getting to know Tony. Tony's a life coach and relationship counselor. Tony transformed his early struggles to become a celebrated author, a celebrity coach, and an international speaker who has impacted millions through his teachings on love, business, and personal development. Starting his entrepreneurial journey at age 25, he built 5 successful companies by age 31 while working with several NBA teams, speaking across continents, and authoring multiple books, including Make It Work. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're glad to have you. So today I want to just have you just tell us about yourself. Tell us how you did growing up as a pastor's son, influenced your approach to helping others and building your career of life coaching.
Right. That's when you think about it, it's kind of, you look back and you're like, I don't know really how it happened, but it was almost like this North Star where I'm just going and in pursuit of providing for my family. So I got married young. I got married at 23 and I had just turned 23. I was only 23 for a couple weeks when I got married. And so that was different, for me coming from Arbondale, Florida, and being around a lot of different guys who they still were living the bachelor life. And then we had our son, and that really rocked my world. And so at 23 years old, being a husband and a father, I had to tap into my purpose. And that's when I really started pushing my book. My wife encouraged me to clear my mind, shrink my circle, and go full throttle in doing something that would actually matter. And so I started pitching myself to Oprah every day. I was working at a group home, and every day before work, I would leave for work at 3 p.m., work until 11 p.m., but I would wake up in the morning and I would just be pitching myself to Oprah, to Tyra Banks, and to the news outlets. And then I would be writing my book or working on a new project within a company and basically working 80 hours a week. And then one day while I was at the group home, I got a call from Oprah's producer, and I stepped out and they were like, hey, we want to fly you and your wife to Chicago to tell your story of when you were a toxic young man playing college football. And that really, it was kind of like a pat on the back to let me know that I could be heard and I could turn my pain into purpose.
So Tony, as you started, you mentioned that you started at this hit around age 23. Can you give us a little peep of prior years leading up to that particular point?
I was a athlete growing up. My dad became a pastor probably when I was 14. But before that, we got into the church when I was 6. And so my whole life was just like structured. Had to read a chapter from the book of Proverbs every day, had to write a paragraph summary. And then I had to go to the book of John and read from the book of John up to the book of Revelation. And so I was like one of those kids on fire for the Lord. And then at 15, that's when the real world, it's like I got to high school and it hit me hard. And so I got distracted by the young ladies, but I played basketball and football. And I got in trouble my 9th grade year. I was hanging with another pastor's son, and we decided we would steal a shirt out of the Lakeland Mall. And we thought we got away with it. And then this all black car pulled up on us. He hopped out and he called me over because I was holding the bag because I wanted to wear the shirt to school first. And he said, what you got in that bag there? I said, just some clothes I bought at the mall. He said, well, we got y'all on camera stealing those shirts. And I had bought some shirt from another store, and he grabbed my wrist. He bent it back all the way. And I learned early that I couldn't be a real thug because I snitched on my friend quick. I said I wasn't the only one. And he said you weren't. And I said no. And I'm like, he over there got me into it. Because my friend was 2 years older than me and I was following his lead. So that was the truth. And we went to jail that night in Bartow. They drove from Lakeland to Bartow and put us in the cell. And then here you got husband and wife pastor duos coming in to pick up their sons. And I separated at that point. That friend ended up being, eventually strung out on drugs and going to jail back and forth, for the rest of his life. But my parents sent me to a private school that next year, and I became the number one running back in Polk County, averaging over 10 yards a carry. And in basketball, I was averaging 18 points a game. We went back to play the public schools that I had always grew up playing those guys, Winter Haven, Arbondale. We beat all the public schools in basketball. And it was a different experience, but then I didn't get to play basketball my senior year. And my dad and my coach had a disagreement, and I sided with my dad, and I just sat out. And so I took my football scholarship, which was a Division II scholarship. It was a full scholarship because they put together athletic and academic and grant money. So it was $28,000 a year in West Virginia. And that's what led me up to it. But I took some of the bad habits from trying to be cool and fit in. And I got kicked off the team at 21 years old. And that's what really started to, rock my world.
Very, very, very interesting. And now here I see a little bit more about your early life as to what the molding up to church, and then straying a little bit away, and this experience in the lockup, which will certainly get your attention, and then you find your love, and you get married, and you're having a child. And so you mentioned in one of our conversations before about the tough love of your wife and how that affected your life. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
When I met my wife, I was 21 years old, and all I knew was toxicity, just being a knucklehead. And she put up with it for about 2 months, and then she broke up with me, and we were apart for 6 months. And our paths crossed again 6 months later, and we immediately hit it off that same day. And then 10 months later, we got married. And then when we got married, we had our son the next month, and he was in intensive care unit. He was born 2.5 months early at 2 pounds, 10 ounces. And I got scared. I thought he was going to die. I didn't understand the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit. And one of my cousins was like, hey, I got some work in the streets to make you some extra money. And I'm like, cuz my wife told me that if I go back to the streets, she's done with me. Like, she refused to be with a guy that won't be above board. And he was like, cuz, you tell your wife she's not going to care when that money comes in. And so I went home and I told my wife, you ain't going to care when the money come in. And she just kind of looked at me, and I went back out there, and it was probably a week, 2 weeks. One day I came home, and I was home. She wasn't home, and she came home, and she had her Bible in her hand. She had her hair in a ponytail. She had her glasses on because she normally wear contacts, and she had her glasses on. Her eyes were red. And I said, oh, Lord. She had been in a meeting with her uncle and a pastor, and they had basically given her the talk and given her the strength to, like, hey, you got to walk away. You got to stand on what you said. Don't reinforce it. And so she told me that day she was leaving if I wasn't leaving the streets. And it was that right there, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, because we had only been married for a few months. I think this was May or June. This was June, and we got married end of March. And so it was her not reinforcing what I wanted to do that was not advantageous to our goals as a young couple. And I had a decision to make: choose my friends who can do nothing for me and the streets, or choose my wife and our child. And I made the right decision. And when I came back, she came back. I begged her back over, it was about 3 days, nonstop calling her all day. And then she came back, and I never looked back since then. Like, I went full fledged, set a goal to be on Oprah in 2 years, and it happened because that was June of 2007, and I got on Oprah in March of 2009. So beat that goal, and it taught me so much, and that's why I wrote the book entitled A Woman's Influence, because having a strong woman who wouldn't reinforce, because my friends and cousins, they had women who reinforced their toxic behavior. Like, they were dating, nurses, like successful women, like degree holders, like my wife, but they would allow them to be in the streets. But my woman said, I don't care what anybody else is doing. I refuse. And that really changed our life.
That's a great story, Tony, and it sounds like, well, not sounds like, you've got a great partner there that really changed and turned things around. Because it sounds like it could have been very easy, to be back out there and just enjoy the money, right? And so, that's very good. You mentioned also that your first company you started at age 25, Soul Writers LLC. Tell us a little bit about how that happened. Was this before Oprah or after Oprah?
I had already written 2 books when I went on Oprah in 2009, and I became an author 2007. And I actually started that first company, I'm getting my dates wrong, 2008. And so
Okay.
when I went on Oprah, I was telling a story. At 25 years old, I was telling a story from when I was 19 or 20 with my ex in college
Right.
while I was playing football. So it really kind of took my life back, and it painted a very negative picture of me. But at that time, I had already written 2 books and changed my life, and I had been married for 2 years at that time. And Oprah, she couldn't stamp me because I was a self-published author at 25 years old, and her brand. So all she could say is, Tony has dedicated his life. He's written books and dedicated his life to sharing his story. And that company, Soul Writers, was where I could ghostwrite books for others and be an author consultant. So essentially, I started stacking my gifts. So because I wrote my book alone and I published it through an internet publisher, I started helping other people with amazing stories do the same. And my first client was an NFL player, and I wrote his book and helped him publish it. And then I went on just to tell the stories of everyone that I met who wanted to publish their book. And so that's what really was the birth of Soul Writers. And then later Gaskins Productions came in 2011, and that's what took me off my day job at 27, and I retired from, I guess you would say, the corporate world at 27.
Okay, that's very, very, very interesting. And in publishing, self-publishing books, uh, how long does it take for you to put these books together?
For me, I write books in a week, and so
Wow.
it's just it's been a gift. My first book, I wrote it in a week, and my clients' books, they don't always know. I don't necessarily want them to know, but I write it in about 3 days. So I have kind of like what they call a flow state. And I write from about 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. And I take breakfast, lunch, and dinner breaks. And I write in story form, but very conversational. And so I've written books for NFL champions and Olympic gold medalists and TV executives. And I approach it with the same formula of writing in a flow state, which is, there's a movie called, I think it was Finding Forrest or something like that. It was a young guy. He was a writer, and his mentor told him, write the first version with your heart. and then write the second version with your mind. And so I kind of took that with me because his story felt like my story. And that's the way I write and produce the books. And they go on to be, 5-star rated books on Amazon or anywhere else they can get ratings. But I believe it's really just because I'm telling stories and making points. And so it's just a gift that I've been given, and I kind of stick to that formula versus stretching it out over 6 months, 12 months, and losing the flow.
Yeah. Tony, when you do this as a ghost writer, and you're the person that you're working with, the author, so to speak, what's the time frame that you work with this person? You mentioned your flow. What's your time frame in this short period of time that you work with this person?
We record their entire story,
Okay.
which the longest it has taken is like 10 hours. And so different people do it different ways. Some people, we do it by phone. And then some people, the NFL champion, we went to a beach house, and he just kind of laid on a couch like a therapy couch and just told me his whole story over a couple of days. And then the TV executive, she did it the same way, to where we were in like a type of suite or something with her assistant, and she told me her story over a full day. And then I go to the drawing board and I get away. I typically go to like a beach house and just write, all day long. And it'll be 3 to 6 days on average. And so it doesn't take long. The WNBA champion that I wrote a book for, she needed hers in a 30-day turnaround. And the same with the Olympian, because they wanted to be able to promote it during the Olympics. So I wrote their book. We recorded it, in a few sessions, and then I wrote it within a week, and we sent it to editing. Goes through, several rounds of editing, 2-3 rounds of editing, but we do it relatively fast, and then we publish it. So that world is available, and I know you know all about that now as well, being a published author with your book, and I love it. And so I
Thank
see,
you.
I see the expertise in it.
So you mentioned that you're this time frame once again. You've had several books that you focused in on love and relationship advice. Tell me where that comes from. Was that a ghostwriting or was that actual publishing yourself?
That was me. That was me publishing myself. So my space, what really blew my brand up was relationship advice.
Mhm.
So I had a friend growing up who, her brother, and she told me one time, she said, "Tony, you the biggest player that I ever known, and so you should write a book." And so I said, "Well, get me 10 questions from your college friends, and I'll answer them from the perspective of a college male." And so she came back with about 7 questions, and I added 3, and that was my first book. And then when I got on Twitter in 2009, 2 years later, after I went on Oprah and Tyra, my friend told me, "You should get on this thing called Twitter." So I got on Twitter, and I quickly found out how I could use it to be beneficial. So I started posting quotes all day from 7:30 a.m. I would post a quote every hour on the hour, 7:30 a.m., 8:30, 9:30, 10:30, all day long. I would just analyze my spirit, grab a lesson from the last hour, and I would post it as an original quote. And then from 10 p.m. to 10:30, I did what I would call a tweet sermon, where I would post at 10, 10:05, 10:10, 10:15, 10:20, 10:25, 10:30. And that tweet sermon would be relationship based. So during the day, it would be self-development and all of that. But then 10 to 10:30, it would be relationship based. And those tweets would go viral. And my tweet started being reshared by mega celebrities in the music industry. And so that blew my brand up. It took my brand from 200 followers on Twitter to hundreds of thousands. And from there, that's really how I was able to expand then to other networks and kind of carry over a few people from Twitter and then let the algorithm do what it does. And that's how I amassed over 3.5 million followers online, just sharing relationship advice for the most part.
Mm. And that's across multiple social mediums or across several. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
the 3 or 4 major ones. I have 1.8 million on Facebook and 900,000 on Instagram, 500,000 on YouTube, and 300,000 on Twitter.
Okay. Okay. Very, very interesting. So you're doing your authorship and you're building these different companies that you have. How did tell us a little insight on how you manage each one of those specific companies. As I understand, you have a small staff.
Right. So I pretty much do all of it myself, and then I would just have
Wow.
consultants. I have consultants. So I don't typically share these secrets, but being that uh I
Well, you don't
love
have to share any secrets now if you don't want to. If you want you
being
to
that
be
I
comfortable.
no, no, no. I want people to know that, you can, because a lot of people say solo entrepreneurship isn't real. And I'm a testament that it is real. And if you want to do it your way, that you can do it. So what I would do is I create several email addresses based on the subject or the topic for that email and for those companies. And then I create a signature for each email address. And so certain email address, one of them, it may be George, and I'll make up another name, George Williams, and I'm responding as George. And then on another one is Laura, another one is Katie. And so I had a whole staff, and then I would bring in people to say, hey, you could be a virtual assistant on this account under this name. You don't even have to use your real name. And that's how I would do it. And then if they got too busy or if they weren't doing it the right way, I'll take it back over and I'll do it. And so I like to be hands on, and also because I'm dealing with tens of thousands of emails because of my audience, to where and it's very sensitive information. People will write in and they will have a lot of personal information. And so I have to be very selective with who I let into my inbox, because it's a lot of vulnerable individuals, because I'm a life coach. And so I've basically done it alone, and then I'll hire, independent contractors for the things I need. And I utilize the freelancing sites like Fiverr and Upwork to get a lot of that extra work done. But I've never had a staff on salary. I've never had anyone on W-2 or anyone, on salary of any sort, in my brand building experience. And also because my wife and children cost me everything. So
Yeah.
they want to spend every dime. So I had to figure it out. And I love it because I don't necessarily, at this stage of life, I don't want my brand to be bigger than me, so to speak. I'm more so about the process versus scale, because I want everything to have my fingerprint on it, which is my blueprint. And if I get too big too fast and try to be an overnight success, I run the risk of watering down my purpose and my mission.
Interesting. So I want to kind of jump back a couple of notches here, but you've done well in maintaining your brand and controlling it and so forth. So there's a lot to be said about your business model. Uh, I don't think everybody can do that, you know. So, but we as I think about as you go through your development. Uh, when you were in college, what did you major in? What was was that where it started to take shape, or was it prior?
It uh, honestly, it is to strengthen my faith in God because what I do, they don't study in college. We didn't have it in college then.
Okay.
Now there are entrepreneurship degrees, there's life coaching degrees. All of that came after college for me.
Okay.
So I was a business management major, and it was very, corporate and structured type of information. And then I
Right.
switched to criminology because my dad was a police for a few years of my life, and I was very intrigued with that world. But what I do today, it really, I didn't learn it in college, and
Mhm.
so I was in college for 8 years, and I never finished. I'm still working on my bachelor's degree,
Okay.
and I'll take a class here, take a class there, but I like to say I went to Mistakes University
Okay.
and got a PhD. And
Sometimes that's where you do it.
you're right. And so I did that. But now I love the fact that they have more real life applicable majors now. Because when I look at schools now, I see life coaching degrees and all of these degrees that I had never heard of when I was in college. I went to college 2002. And so it really, it just feels God breathed in the sense of like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and I still don't understand it myself. Like I sit down to go to work and create courses and videos and outlines and proposals, and I don't even understand what I'm doing. And the first time that I wrote a book, I had never read a book. And so when I sent it to the publisher, the internet publisher, they were like, well, I mean, we could tell you read a lot of books because this is already formatted and done. It's ready to go. And I said, well, I've never read a book, but I just kind of assumed this is how a book would look based on from me looking inside of a book. Because the only two books I had looked at was Martin Luther King's autobiography and Malcolm X's autobiography. And other than that, in school in Polk County in Arbondale, we weren't required to read the full book. The school system was different. And so I was venturing to do something that had to be innate. It was
Mhm. Right.
a gift that
Yeah.
I didn't fully understand. And then I heard a quote that said, readers don't write and writers don't read. And that stuck with me. I don't know who quote, who's that belongs to, but it became true because I met a guy who had read over 1,000 books, but he couldn't write a book to save his life. And me, I had read 0 books and I could write a book in a week. And it taught me a lot about just the brain
Right.
and that nobody knows what they're talking about and everybody's guessing. And a lot of people try to make things gospel and try to make it apply to everybody. And I realized that there's no two people with the same fingerprint. So we would be wrong to say that only readers are leaders and only learners are earners, and that there's no such thing as solo entrepreneurship. But those are the popular messages that sometimes can ostracize and alienate and marginalize certain people who maybe didn't have access to everything. And I've ventured and I've found that there's no real rhyme or reason, that we all have our own purpose and our own path, and it may not look like anybody else's, and we have to be okay with that and not feel inadequate and less than just because the messages that go viral don't fit our life.
Yeah. Well, Tony, it's this is a really interesting story, and you mentioned you've only read several books. I would include the Bible in there in your early learnings and readings, and given your teaching from your dad, and reading the Bible and giving a report on it every what I'm not sure was that every day or every week, whatever you were doing there certainly has a lot to do with where you are today, and those skills and learnings that you developed there plays a big part in your life. For those who've just joined us, I want to reintroduce Mr. Tony Gaskins Jr. here, who is a life coach and a relationship counselor. Outstanding young man, brilliant, I might say, in his and self development and developing his companies. Tony, you mentioned that you have been involved with the NBA teams and NBA players. Tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Twitter, it changed my life, and I had a marketing strategy, a networking strategy of when I posted tweets, if I seen someone retweet me twice, I would direct message them and tell them thank you for their support. And one day I did that, and the person wrote me back and was like, "Hey, no problem. I would like to introduce you to my aunt who was a health consultant for the NBA and the NFL." And at that time, I was 26 years old. And then when I spoke to the health consultant, Miss Sandra McDonald, she introduced me to the assistant of, I believe, the director of the National Basketball Players Association. And they brought me in to speak to the top 100 high school basketball players when I was 26. And after speaking to those young men for, I think it was 20 minutes, the president, which was, I believe, Antonio Davis, who was a Indiana Pacers star, I believe, back in that right before then, and he
Yes.
transitioned.
Hmm.
And so he came up to me and he said, "Man, that was an amazing speech." And he said, "What you mentioned, I have it tattooed on me: choices, decisions, and consequences." And that was a topic they gave me, and I just kind of told my story. And so then they asked me to come speak to the NBA rookies that same year, which was a few months later. And that was the class of John Wall. He was the number one pick that year. And so that's how I got into it. It was a Twitter connection, and I did it, and they brought me back every year until I was put on retainer exclusively for an NBA team to help their players kind of get along and build chemistry. And leading up to that NBA exclusivity with that team, I had started working with college teams through Twitter as well. So from the players retweeting me, college coaches started seeing that they were mentioning me and retweeting my quotes. And so college coaches started following me. And it was the women's side first in women's basketball. And I started working with those programs from Western Michigan University, which was Coach Tasha McDowell. She gave me my break into the college world. And then that led me to working with UCLA women's and Florida State women's. And then eventually, after the NBA, it took me to the men's side. One of my NBA players put me with Baylor. And then from Baylor, it started to spread. And so it was just, a network, one coach telling another coach, and me just trying to save the world one student athlete at a time.
As you were doing this, you're still maintaining your companies, still running your companies, correct?
Yes, because those events are like, those things are like once, just one day a week.
Right.
And, so it would only take from me, other than the NBA, I was working with the Houston Rockets. Other than that experience, because that one would take 2 to 4 days a week.
All right.
And what I would do during that period, I was touring. So I would work with the team for 2 days, and then on the weekend, I would do a speaking engagement that I produced myself. And the way I did that is I would Google event space in Detroit, and I would click on images, and I would find the image of the ballroom that I like, and I would click it, and it would be like a Marriott hotel, and I would write in and negotiate the price, and it would be, let's say, $1,200. I would make the deposit, and then I would fly into Detroit, and I would be selling tickets through my Facebook page. And then I would sell 300 to 700 tickets at about $25 to $80 or $100. And the night before the event, I would send an email to the ticket holders, and I would say, "Hey, I need some volunteers." And then they would all write in saying they'll volunteer. I'll pick the first 12 people, and then I would say, meet me at the venue 2 hours before it starts. And then I would delegate and give everybody their jobs. And so it would just be me. And when it was time to start, I would just come in from backstage, grab the microphone and teach for about 2 hours. And then get on a plane and fly home.
Wow. We have any young entrepreneurs out there listening to this story? You just threw some wonderful nuggets out there for them to take a look at. That's quite interesting, Tony. That's how you put that together. You know, Antonio Davis is now the president of our Retired Players Association. I was just on a call with him last week and had some emails back and forth with him on the membership committee of which I belong to now. After prior, being the chairman of the board of the NBA Retired Players Association, so gotten reconnected, and these type of events that you're involved in, they have going on obviously at different levels throughout the country. But that's very, very, very interesting. Good feedback. Are there any particular athletes today that you're working close with, NBA, NFL, or
Uh,
otherwise?
I, I work with athletes in the NBA, MLS, MLB, and boxing, and I've formed a habit of not mentioning them
Mhm.
uh, publicly because sometimes it could be spent by the media that they're having relationship issues or that
Okay.
they're having life issues. And
Right.
so I unlike the on-court trainers or the personal trainers, they can kind of market their name and say, "Hey, these are my clients." For me, it's confidentiality, so I don't really get publicity off of it, or I can't, monetize it or market it just because of the intimacy of the work
Right.
and the privacy of it and confidentiality. So I've been doing that since 2010. With
Hmm.
those players, every rookie class out of the 60 players, about 30 of them would take my phone number
Hmm.
and they would send me a text right away so I can save their number. And sometimes it would be I would get a call midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning from a player that I did not remember his name, but he was drafted and I spoke to his rookie class, and then I would be brought in as, a mediator between him and his girlfriend, fiance, or wife to help them through that process. And then for some players, it's they started to recognize my business model and they would ask me to help them transition into being a speaker or help them become an author or help them start a business or start a nonprofit. So I like to life, love, and business. I don't want to limit myself. I believe in a balanced life in the sense of we got to learn how to do it all, and not just, only be successful in one area. So I try to help them do the same. Don't just be a successful athlete or just a successful businessman. Learn how to be a successful husband and a successful father as well.
So in doing so, in a general sense, what's been the biggest challenges that you've had in these kinds of working relationships, especially if you have multiple relationships that you're working with? Has there been anything that just jumped out at you?
The biggest challenge is getting them to understand that not everyone in their circle should be a yes man.
Mhm.
And so I am not a yes man. And when they understand that I'm going to say what they need to hear, not what they want to hear, and then I'm going to do what's in the best interest of both parties. So if they have me speaking with one of their family members or a significant other, I'm not going to push their narrative or coerce or convince someone to enable them. And I will speak life and truth to every party. And so that's been the biggest challenge of them getting accustomed to someone telling them the truth even when it hurts, and them getting upset with me and mad with me and getting distance and, cutting me off for a little bit and then coming back sometime later and saying, hey, everything you told me was right. Everything you told me I needed to hear. And now I realize that, you're not like everybody else, that you're actually a real person. And so that has happened numerous times. And it's bittersweet because, you have those little riffs, but then, so that's the bitter part. But then the sweet part is when it comes full circle and it works out, and they realize that not everybody is trying to take from you. Not everybody needs you financially. And there are people who have genuine hearts and really care. And so and it's hard for them to believe that. So that's the other part, is helping them believe in someone being genuine. Like they can't believe it. Like it's hard. They're so used to everyone taking, that when you're genuine, they're waiting on what they would call the other shoe to drop. Like they're waiting to see you show your fangs or show your greed or show that you're not who you're portraying yourself to be. And so that process is always interesting.
I've noticed that in the today's NBA guys in particular, not that familiar with the football and some of the other sports, but closer to the NBA, that a lot of the younger guys who came in 20 years ago, who were spoiled by agents and spoiled by parents and so forth, who had a lot more difficulty during tough times during their playing days, and some wound up broke, some wound up with other serious situations. It's gotten a lot better today, and I'm assuming that a lot of that has to do with guys like yourself that are working with these guys as they come into the league, and being able to talk with the parent, the agent, the financial person, and so forth. Because today they're making so much more money, and but dealing with a lot more tougher decisions when they're entering the league as 19-year-olds and as 20-year-olds. So I'm sure that the work you do is very beneficial. Would you agree?
Yes, I definitely agree. It's more coaches that in the college level now that are starting to understand the benefit of speakers, like teachers and life coaches, so to speak. And what I have been able to help coaches understand is that the player's mind off the court is just as important as their body on the court. And coaches like Coach Scott Drew at Baylor, he really was the first coach that I saw that tapped into that space. And in our first full season, we won a national championship. And that was his 17th season. And as he tells me, he was like, Tony, we didn't change much, but we added you. And these guys working on their life off the court really helped them focus on the court. And the proof was in the pudding, because to win a national championship with a team comprised of players that none were, it was no top 5 players, top 10 players, at the highest rank probably would have been 50th, in the nation, maybe coming out of high school. And some of the guys had transferred in from mid-major schools like Presbyterian and UNC Asheville, and to come together and win a national championship, it was a testament to their mindset and the way they lived their lives off the court. And that really translated to their play on the court, because they were focused on limiting all of the distractions. So some of them cut out like intimate relationships with women altogether, and they sacrificed during the season. Whatever vices it was, they started going to war in the dark to control all of that. And now you have this group of young men who were not the tallest, were not the fastest, could not jump the highest, but they were the most focused, and they got to the national championship game and really put a whooping on, Gonzaga, which was a
Yeah.
very, very talented team.
Yep. I remember
And
that game.
and I really believe that, it was that group of guys just really buying into their coach's culture and what they were being provided as a team, as a culture, with the love and the joy, the camaraderie. And so I think movements now is like mental health is a focus. And a lot of teams are, as a team here, NBA team that reached out to me and asked me to come in and speak later this month on the 28th, and we've been talking about topics, that we should touch on. And me hearing the type of topics they want to talk about, I'm like, okay, this is a great sign. So it's definitely changing for the better.
That's great. That's good. That's great. And a couple of his players are now in the league, right?
Yes, yeah. I worked with them for 5 seasons in a row, and took off this season because my son is a senior in high school, and I just needed to make sure that I could be here and be the proper role model for him in this important year. But he has produced every year, one or two or three in the seasons that I've been with him, helping them as a mentor, 2, 3 players each year. So it's been pretty impressive.
Okay. So, as an international speaker, how do you have to adapt your message in speaking to different cultures around the world?
That's a very hard thing to do because every culture is completely different than American culture. And so, like, when I'm speaking in Johannesburg, South Africa, or Nairobi, Kenya, or even in Montreal, Canada, it's a different message. And then speaking in the islands, Trinidad and Tobago and Bahamas, and these different places that I've spoken, and then in Europe, going to different places in like London, and it's different everywhere. So I have to become in a few days immersed in the culture and learn how they do things, learn how they think, and learn the differences between their culture and American culture, and then adapt my message. So, like, for example, in Nairobi, the man, when I went to speak there, the man doesn't do anything at home. He doesn't have to wash a dish. He doesn't have to sweep a floor. He doesn't have to, he just goes to work and he goes home. And then at home, the woman takes care of everything. Whereas for me, my message is that there are no gender roles, and that a man could change a diaper, and a man could cook a meal, and a man can do the dishes if need be. And so when I went over there, I almost got in trouble. And I had to, and they were like, "Hey, no, don't change it too much. Like, we're trying to be open to this. We're trying to grow and evolve. So, that's why we brought you over here." And so that has been interesting, and there's some contention, some back and forth between me and the men that's there. But it's been a learning experience that has really opened my eyes, and I love it. I love it. It allowed me to see the world because I didn't get that education growing up. In geography class, I didn't get to learn as much as I would have liked to learn about these other places. So it's been life changing for me, and I can't wait to take my kids and really just let them get immersed, in these other cultures. We did do a 6-week tour through, Europe, and that was eye opening. Being in certain places where they didn't speak English, and but it's a lot more to see.
Yeah, when I was 18, we won the national championship at Kentucky Wesleyan, and for winning the championship, we had the opportunity to travel to Europe and Africa and visit and spend time there with the different cultures in the different countries, the West Africa, and it changed my life totally when I came back in a number of different ways. This was back during the late '60s, mid to late '60s. So things were kind of in a little upheaval here, culture and so forth. So to actually visit and see what was going on. It gave me a new outlook on how to approach things back here at home, you know. So I can identify with some of that. Look, going to your book, Make It Work. Tell us a little bit about how you uh, came to put that writing together.
That was my first book that I published with a big five publisher, top five publisher. I published that with Simon and Schuster. And that came about because my Facebook had gone viral and I was posting quotes. And on those quotes, I would get about 25,000 shares. And a literary agent reached out to me and she said, Tony, I've never seen anyone get 25,000 shares every post that they make. And you should, publish a book, like a traditionally published book. And so we talked about it and she wanted me to publish a business book. And because of my entrepreneurial side, when she learned about that and how I was building business as an entrepreneur, and it was very unique and creative to her how I was doing it. And she wanted me to write about that, but I wasn't ready to make that transition. And so I turned her down at the moment, and that probably was maybe 2015 or so. And then I ended up publishing a business book with the oldest publisher, John Wiley and Sons, through my friend John Gordon, who contacted me put me with John Wiley and Sons. And I published The Dream Chaser, but I didn't feel it in my spirit to really push it as hard as I should have, because my audience knew me as a relationship coach, and that entrepreneurial book, it kind of threw me off a little bit. But the next year I reached out to that agent and we circled that conversation, and I sent her an outline, and I had created an outline in 5 minutes, just on the notes on my phone, on the iPhone. And I sent it to her and said, hey, what do you think about this outline? She said, Tony, this can sell. This can sell. And I signed with her as an agent, and Latoya Smith, and she pitched it to about 12 publishing houses, and it kind of created a bidding war. And then Simon and Schuster had two imprints that were, fighting over it. And then they decided, hey, let's just collaborate on it, and we'll both publish this together, these two imprints under Simon and Schuster. And so that's how that came about. And so they offered me a 2-book deal, and that's what birthed A Woman's Influence as well. But Make It Work was really, my heart and soul, because it was all of the lessons, 22 lessons that I felt were principle based and timeless, that could help any couple, because it had sustained my wife and I, which we are, being millennials, it's extremely hard to remain married and faithful as millennials with all of the distractions
Right.
and all of the social media. So for us to be able to figure it out, I felt like these lessons could help any relationship in any stage. And so that's how that came about, because my heart and soul wants to see more marriages. More so than more millionaires, I want to see more marriages. And I believe more marriages will produce more millionaires. And that's how I began to earn millions, because of my marriage. And so that's really where my heart is at. But I'm glad I put that out there, and I learned a lot through with traditional publishing. And
Yeah.
so now I'm kind of more into hybrid publishing and, independent self-publishing. But the traditional machine it was very cool, to be in every store in America, every Walmart, every Target, that was pretty cool.
So, as a self-taught individual that's been successful, to our audience that's listening in out there, what would your advice be to those that may want to travel the same route?
I would say spend 30 minutes a day looking within. 30 minutes of stillness, of quietness, and just mental mapping, like exploration of your mind, of your ideas, of your dreams, of your visions. and really getting in tune with who you are internally and intrinsically. And then from there, putting it on paper or jotting it down so that you create from within instead of from without. A lot of times we look outwardly for inspiration and we listen to the gurus and the teachers and the speakers, and we fail to realize that they are no more qualified than us. And we all are equally qualified, but we have to look within. And it's our job as a people to look within and then produce and then collaborate. And that has really changed my life by looking within and creating my own blueprint, creating my own sales funnel, creating my own launch formula, creating my own business model. Instead of listening to every voice, I will hear what they say. I take it with a grain of salt. And if it doesn't make sense to me, if I can't understand it, and in the words of Albert Einstein, explain it to a 6-year-old, then I discard it and I create what I can understand because I can live with that for the rest of my life. And that's what I would say. Like we all are geniuses. We all are capable. We all are born millionaires. We just got to look within our internal bank to cash the check. And that changes everything.
Great advice. What does it look like now moving forward, the next phase in your life, Tony?
It is scary. It is scary. I'm 40 now and I will be 41 next month. And it's starting to scare me now because my vision is expanding. And I'm gleaning inspiration from individuals who have dreamed dreams much larger than them. And I have been afraid until this point. And now I realize I'm closer, maybe, not I'm not gonna speak that. I was gonna say I'm closer to the grave than I am to the birth canal, but I believe I'm gonna believe a little more. And so, but I know this next 40, I want it to be 40 years of legacy and legacy building, things that I can leave to our sons and my grandchildren. So my nonprofit organization, Tony Gaskins Family Foundation, is what I'm really pushing now. And I'm looking for land and, got a meeting with the city next week to see what resources they have as far as land or building, because I want a facility that not only I can have a basketball gym, but I can have classrooms and I can have some offices, and the youth can come and be developed from the inside out, and I can help them bridge the gap between their gifts and their purposes and their purpose, so that they can have a sense of purpose at a young age and know who they are and what they want to do, instead of just taking the traditional beaten path and it not being for them. I want them to be able to custom create based on their fingerprint what they are here to do, and identify that as early as the age of 10, so that they can set out with a relentless pursuit of pure vision, so that by the time they are our age, they already, have it figured out and they're doing the most amazing things. And I think we live so many years lost and just not having a sense of direction. Our internal compass is broken and we find out sometimes too late. And so I want to help the youth discover it earlier so that it can stop just idolizing entertainers, because it's entertainment, and they can have confidence and strength from within. So that's a big vision. And that's where now it's the team building. It's now I need the staff.
Yeah. Well, Tony, you've done a wonderful job, and at the early age of 40, I think that you've got plenty of time here on Earth. God is speaking through you, and you've got some great things ahead of you. So know that you have a purpose, and know that you're well respected in in the communities that you do business in, you work in, and so it's been a pleasure to have you on the program today, and can't wait to share it with the world. So thank you and appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure.
This has been Catch as Catch Can. Your success story is waiting to be written. What will you catch today? Go to tinsley.speaks.com for exclusive content, resources, and opportunities. Catch as Catch Can with George Tinsley Sr. is a production of Advantage Media.